It's Tuesday, October 16th, 1984, 4:30 p.m. at Le Ponge-sur-Vologne in the east of France. Little Gregory Villemont, 4, leaves kindergarten with his nanny, Christine Jacot. Around 5 p.m., his mother, Christine Villemont, a 24-year-old seamstress at the Manufacture de Confection Vosgienne, MCV, comes and picks him up. Christine talks briefly with the caretaker from Mrs. Jacot's building. She explains she is in a bit of a hurry because she has ironing waiting for her at home. Gregory gets into the black Renault 5, and the mother and child take the approximately 10-minute drive back to their house, located in a more isolated area on top of a hill. After putting a wooden cap on her son's head, Christine leaves Gregory alone, playing on a pile of sand in front of the house, while she goes back inside to finish her ironing. Around 5:15 p.m. and 5:30 p.m., the young mother goes out to check on her son, but the 4-year-old isn't there anymore. She starts calling for him and searching for him, but Gregory is nowhere to be found. Christine asks her neighbors if they have seen her son, but no one seems to know where the little boy could be. Anxious, the young woman fears Gregory might have tried to go to one of his friends, living close to the post office downtown. She takes her car and leaves, looking desperately for him. Once again, her search is in vain, and she finds no sign of Gregory. Around 5:45 p.m., Christine returns home to the phone ringing. It's her mother-in-law, Monique Villemont, who is panicking. She has been trying to reach Christine for 15 minutes. Unsuccessful, she also called her son, Jean-Marie, Christine's husband, at his job, and the police. A few minutes ago, Michel, one of Jean-Marie's older brothers and Christine's brother-in-law, received a disturbing phone call. An anonymous man said he had finally avenged himself. He claimed to have kidnapped Gregory, strangled him and thrown his body into the nearby Vologne River. He added that he knew Christine was looking for her child, but she would never find him, ending his call by declaring, "My vengeance is done." Terrified, Christine calls the police. She is quickly joined by Jean-Marie's family, the police, and Jean-Marie himself. The police start to investigate the surroundings, hoping it is not too late to find little Gregory. At the Villemonts' house, everyone is waiting anxiously for any news. Around 9:30 p.m., the family receives the terrible news. The police have found Gregory's body in the chilly waters of the Vologne River in Docelle, a nearby village. His hands and feet were bound with a rope, and his wooden hat was pulled down over his face. 40 years later, the murder of little Gregory is still unsolved. It has become one of the most infamous unsolved cases in France. Welcome to Bad Things. As usual, we'll be looking at the timeline, the known facts and the theories to determine what most likely happened to Gregory Villemont. Gregory Gilbert Villemont was born on August 24, 1980. He was a mischievous child who loved cars, Grenadier, and Michael Jackson. Gregory was the pride of his parents, especially his father, Jean-Marie, who shared everything with his son. In February 1981, Jean-Marie, then 23, was promoted to foreman at the car factory where he had worked since he was 16. He built a brand new house for his family on a hill in Les Ponges, and they soon moved in. The couple also owned 2 cars and had furnished their home tastefully. This new social status elevated Jean-Marie's position within his family, making him more of a leader. However, it also made him the main target of the Crow. The same year Jean-Marie was promoted, the Villemonts began receiving strange anonymous calls. From 1981 to 1983, the Crow, so named by the media, harassed the Villemonts with hundreds of calls and letters, all threatening to expose family secrets. The Crow initially targeted Albert and Monique, Jean-Marie's parents. He reminded Albert of the suicide of his father after the war and harassed Monique about how her father had impregnated her sister, Louisette. Another family secret used for blackmail was the paternity of Jackie, Albert and Monique's eldest son. Monique had been pregnant by another man before marrying Albert, and Jackie learned as a teenager that Albert was not his biological father, but this was not supposed to be known outside the family. In addition to threatening to reveal these secrets, the Crow would call family members pretending that someone had died. One day, Jean-Marie and Christine discovered that the tires of their cars had been slashed, and one evening something was thrown at their window, breaking it. The Crow seemed to know everything discussed during family reunions. The Crow harbored intense hatred for the Villemans, particularly for Jean-Marie, whom he referred to as boss due to his factory status. By April 1983, the threats escalated. The Crow sent a death threat letter to the family, ordering Albert and Monique to stop seeing Jean-Marie or face retribution. Albert reported the situation to the police, but little action was taken. Around that time, the Crow frequently called Jean-Marie and Christine. Jean-Marie would often respond with mockery, which infuriated the Crow. However, one day when the Crow threatened to burn their house and kill Christine, Jean-Marie lost his temper. He declared that if that were the case, he would simply build a new house and marry another woman. But when the Crow began discussing Gregory, Jean-Marie snapped. The Crow had discovered Jean-Marie's Achilles heel. On May 17, 1983, Gregory's parents received a letter threatening their son's life. The Crow signed off, "This is my last letter. You won't hear from me again. You'll wonder who I was, but you'll never find me." For months, the Villemans heard nothing from the Crow, leading them to believe their nightmare was over, until that fateful call on the late afternoon of October 16, 1984. The morning after Gregory's murder, Jean-Marie received the Crow's final letter, in which the murderer signed off, "I hope that you will die from sorrow, boss. Even your money cannot bring back your son. This is my vengeance." A poor investigation. The police swiftly began investigating to uncover the identity of the mysterious Crow. However, due to mistakes and inexperience, they ruined evidence from the last letter. Many people had touched it, mixing fingerprints, and officers mishandled the black powder used to identify those prints, ultimately destroying the last hope of finding the murderer. Forensic precautions were minimal. In 1984, DNA analysis was not yet a tool for solving criminal cases, which severely hampered the investigation. The autopsy conducted the day after Gregory's murder raised further complications. The child's body showed no signs of violence, no scratches or bruises, and drowning was considered the cause of death. However, due to a lack of samples taken from the body, it remained unclear whether Gregory drowned in the Valonia River or was drowned in a bathtub before being thrown into the river. Additionally, the autopsy did not determine if the 4-year-old had been intoxicated with any substances before his death. With few leads, the police focused their attention on the Villemans and their family. The Crow knew all their secrets, details only someone close to the family could know. On October 18, 1984, 140 family members and relatives were called to the police station for handwriting analysis. 2 days later, the police scrutinized Gregory's funeral, believing the murderer might be in attendance. Unfortunately, media presence marred the ceremony, leading to clashes between the Villemans and reporters, eager for dramatic stories. Tensions peaked when Christine, devastated by her son's death, collapsed during the burial, prompting journalists to rush toward her to capture the scene. Gregory's murder captured national attention, and the small, quiet village of Lepange was inundated by the media. Journalists infiltrated both the Villemans and the police, publishing anything that could sell, sometimes jeopardizing the entire investigation. Under public scrutiny, the police continued their search while waiting for handwriting experts to provide results. 10 days after Gregory's death, They conducted the first crime reconstruction to establish where the body might have been thrown into the river. After numerous attempts and considering that he had no bruises or scratches, they concluded Gregory's body might have been thrown from Docelle, close to where it was found. However, despite creating 2 EFITs based on eyewitness accounts, the police had very few leads. On October 22nd, they received a strange call from a woman named Marie-Ange Laroche. Marie-Ange was the wife of Bernard Laroche, a close cousin of Jean-Marie. She implicated Jackie and his wife, Liliane. However, the police were more intrigued by Marie-Ange's behavior than her claims. She was calling from a cafe rather than her home and was unusually insistent about Jackie, who, from the police's perspective, had no motive. Later, Marie-Ange was called to the station, and the police checked her and her husband Bernard's alibis. Both had alibis. Marie-Ange was working her evening shift, and Bernard was at his Aunt Louisette's house with their son and Marie-Ange's youngest sister, Muriel Boll, 16. However, during Bernard's interrogation, the police noted his intense hostility toward Jean-Marie. He was also subjected to a handwriting analysis. A week later, the experts indicated that Bernard could be the Crow. However, they emphasized the need for more time to definitively incriminate him. Nonetheless, the police placed the couple in custody and interrogated them on October 30th. Without strong evidence or confessions, they were released the following day. On October 31st, the police interrogated Louisette and Muriel Boll to verify Bernard Laroche's alibi. However, Muriel's testimony was filled with inconsistencies. She claimed to have taken the bus home from school, but upon investigation, the police found that neither the bus driver nor her classmates remembered seeing her that day. When Muriel was called back to the station on November 4th for a second interrogation, she finally confessed. On October 16th, Bernard had picked her up after school with his son. They stopped at de Villemant's house, where Bernard left for a few minutes with a boy she identified as Gregory. They then drove to Docelle, where Bernard left a car with Gregory before returning alone to Louisette's house. Meanwhile, a handwriting expert identified Bernard Laroche's initials in one of the Crow's letters. The next morning, Muriel recounted the same story to Judge Jean-Michel Lambert, who ordered Bernard's immediate arrest but sent the teenager home without supervision. This decision from the judge became one of the most criticized aspects of the case. 24 hours later, Muriel's parents called the media, and in front of the cameras, the 16-year-old retracted her statement. She claimed the police had pressured her, insinuating that she had had sexual relations with her brother-in-law and threatening to send her to a reformatory if she didn't tell Judge Lambert the story they had concocted. She insisted Bernard was completely innocent. This retraction created a media firestorm. While Judge Lambert remained confident despite Muriel's change of heart, the prosecution lacked enough evidence against Laroche, leading the court to order his release. Bernard, still under indictment, was released on February 4, 1985. On that same day, Jean-Marie declared to the media that he would kill Bernard. A descent to darkness. Jean-Marie was devastated by grief. The media harassed his family, particularly his wife. Some even began to suggest that Christine might be the killer. In November, several of her colleagues told Judge Lambert they had seen her at the post office on the day of the murder, suspecting she had sent the Crow's last letter. With Muriel's retraction and a lack of strong evidence, the judge began to consider Christine a potential suspect. Desperate, Christine attempted suicide and was hospitalized when Bernard Laroche was released. Fueled by the gossip he read in the press, Jean-Marie was sure his cousin Bernard Laroche was his son's killer. The journalist Jean Kerr, working for the newspaper Paris Match, had befriended the Villemants and was also feeding them his theories about Laroche. On the evening of March 28th, Kerr was at the Villemans' home, speaking with Jean-Marie. He shared with him the transcription of Laroche's interrogation that he had managed to obtain. For Gregory's father, it sounded like a confession to the murder of his son. Jean Kerr tried to dissuade him from killing Bernard, and knowing that Jean-Marie possessed a weapon, he called the judge to inform him of the situation. Lambert didn't take it seriously and went on weekend leave. The next day, Jean-Marie went to Laroche's house and waited for him after work. When the family returned, Jean-Marie confronted Bernard and ultimately killed him, shooting him in the chest in front of his wife and son. After the murder, Jean-Marie went to the police station and confessed to what he had just done. He was arrested and convicted of Bernard Laroche's murder. Due to Laroche's death, charges against him were dropped. Christine then became the principal suspect in Gregory's murder. After her colleagues' testimonies and the results of certain graphology analyses that incriminated her, Christine Jacot, the boy's nanny, also revealed inconsistencies in the schedule she provided to the police that day. Finally, the police found a rope similar to the one used on Gregory's body at the Villemans' house. Judge Lambert decided to indict her for the murder on July 5, 1985. Pregnant with twins, Christine began an 11-day hunger strike to protest her incarceration and assert her innocence. She was released after the court cited the absence of motive and insufficient evidence. However, she was still indicted in Gregory's murder and faced other legal actions, including a reconstruction she refused to participate in, explaining she was being asked to do things she had not done. The aftermath. In 1986, due to procedural mistakes and his lack of impartiality, especially in colluding with the media, Judge Lambert was removed from the case and replaced. In December 1987, Jean-Marie was released with credit for time served. He was awaiting his trial and benefiting from a partial suspension of his sentence. 1993 became a year of hope for the Villemans. In February, Christine was finally cleared of the charges against her. In November, Jean-Marie's trial ended with a 5-year sentence, but he was released 2 weeks after the trial concluded. Regarding Gregory's murder case, the Villemans never stopped searching for their son's killer. In 2000, the case was reopened to look for DNA evidence on the stamp of one of the Crow's letters. Unfortunately, experts declared it non-exploitable, and the case was closed again. Gregory's parents pursued similar procedures between 2008 and 2013 to find DNA on the ropes and other letters. Again, to the despair of Jean-Marie and Christine, experts could not establish a profile. Nevertheless, new elements led investigators to reopen the case in 2017. First, new software used in graphology helped to incriminate other family members, Jean-Marie's aunt and uncle, Jacqueline and Marcel Jacob, as well as Michelle's wife, Jeanette. They were all interrogated by the police. Jeanette was released while the Jacobs invoked their right to remain silent. New testimonies also emerged. One of the Villemans' neighbors confessed that he saw a man resembling Bernard Laroche and a woman with the same red hair as Muriel near Gregory's house at the time of the kidnapping. He explained that he didn't say anything at the time because he was on his way to see his mistress and didn't want to get caught by his wife. One of Muriel's cousins also came forward, explaining that Muriel told him she had been beaten by her sister Marie-Ange and their mother when she returned home after her interrogation. They forced her to change her testimony. Muriel was interrogated once again and still claimed Bernard Laroche's innocence. Her confrontation with her cousin also revealed inconsistencies in his testimony. In 2018, these new indictments were deemed insufficient by the court, and in 2020, the 1984 interrogation of Muriel was declared unconstitutional and dismissed. Now approaching its 40th anniversary, Gregory's murder has left more questions than answers regarding the possible murderer. The impossible other lead. Gregory Villemard's case has haunted all those who have worked on it. When the case was reopened in 2017, Judge Lambert committed suicide, terrified of being caught up in the media circus and facing accusations of failing to resolve the case. As we have seen, the media played a significant role in the investigation, and it was not uncommon for journalists' theories to become part of it. One of the main theories developed, which was ultimately taken into account during the investigation, was that Christine was Gregory's murderer. In July 1985, this theory gained further traction when Marguerite Duras, a famous French writer, published a controversial article in the newspaper Libération, accusing Christine of killing Gregory, but framing her potential act as vengeance for her dull life. Duras later apologized for her piece, explaining that she wrote it out of emotion. To this day, some people still claim Christine killed her son. Christine is indeed likely the last person to have seen Gregory before he was kidnapped and killed, and the investigation began based on her testimony. The case that Judge Lambert built against her relied on several elements. First, 3 of her colleagues claimed to have seen her at the post office on the day of the murder. Their version implied that she was not at home. However, during a confrontation with them, Christine explained they were mistaken. She had gone to the post office to send a bank check for a mail order, but it was on October 15th, not the 16th. Later, investigators found the check, corroborating the mother's account. Inconsistencies in her testimony, raised by Christine Jacot, Gregory's nanny, were also set aside when a new judge took over the case in 1987. Judge Maurice Simon wanted to base his investigation on facts and did not want the media to interfere with his work. When he ordered a new reconstruction of Gregory's kidnapping and carefully reviewed Christine's schedule, he demonstrated that it would have been impossible for the mother to kill her child in such a short window of time. Other elements were used to implicate Christine as the Crow, including an increase in her phone usage during the period when the Crow was harassing the family. However, later investigations showed that many family members had similar increases in phone usage at that time. Moreover, numerous calls from the Crow occurred while Christine was at work. Nevertheless, one particular piece of evidence weighed heavily in Christine's indictment. Graphology experts identified similarities between Christine's handwriting and some of the Crow's letters, especially the one claiming responsibility for the murder. However, as has occurred in many cases, graphology is not a 100% exact science. Subsequent analyses using different techniques exonerated the young mother from being the Crow. Finally, the biggest flaw in Lambert's theory was the motive. Before the graphology evidence implicated Christine, some journalists were already advocating for the theory that she was the killer. In search of sensational stories for their articles, they learned from people close to the Villemards that Christine had considered getting an abortion during her first pregnancy. This was never proven and did not indicate any negligence on her part once Gregory was born. They also alleged that Christine had a lover and that she despised her life with Jean-Marie and Gregory. Again, this was never substantiated, and Christine consistently denied it. Unfortunately for her, another individual involved in the investigation believed the journalist's claims. In 1985, due to the numerous errors of the initial investigation, the case was handed over to a police service from the larger city of Nancy. Its police chief, Jacques Carazi, was convinced that Christine was the murderer. In 2019, he gave an interview for the Netflix documentary Who Killed the Little Gregory, in which he shared his shocking impression of Christine. He believed she didn't seem affected enough by the murder and found her way too attractive for a mother mourning the death of her son. Can you imagine losing your son and being implicated in his death simply because the police in charge of the case find you too pretty for a grieving mother? Fortunately, Christine has been cleared of all charges, and in 2004, the French state awarded Christine and Jean-Marie Villemard €35,000 each for procedural failures in the handling of Gregory's case. Given all the elements concerning the Crow, it seems difficult to believe that only one person could have harassed a family for such an extended period, kidnapped Gregory, and killed him without anyone noticing. Additionally, investigators listening to recordings of certain calls made by the Crow established that a woman participated in some of them. A group of people, likely from the family or close to it, could have carried out this act while protecting one another and not confessing. When the investigation began, the police found that while the Villemans appeared to be a close-knit clan, there were numerous clashes and rivalries, especially toward Jean-Marie. His success was, as we've seen, one of the things the Crow hated most. This bitterness existed not only between Jean-Marie and others, but particularly with his brothers, especially Michel. Michel was very close to Bernard Laroche, who is still viewed by the public as one of the main suspects in the case. Having lost his parents as a toddler, Bernard was raised by Marcel and Jacqueline Jacob, Jean-Marie's aunt and uncle. He often played with Jean-Marie and his siblings, but harbored a certain resentment towards the family, as he was frequently made fun of and mistreated. According to sources close to the investigation, Bernard also resented Jean-Marie for his success, even though he himself had just become a foreman at the factory where he worked at the time of Gregory's murder. There were also rumors suggesting that Bernard had a crush on Christine, which had been rejected, intensifying his jealousy toward Jean-Marie. However, Jean-Marie's success was not the only reason for the animosity directed at him. He was seen as a class traitor for another choice he made. The Villemans and their relatives all worked in the same factories and were affiliated with the same trade union, the CGT. In 1981, when Jean-Marie was promoted, he refused to remain in the union, causing further rifts in his family, especially with Jackie, whose father-in-law, Roger Jacquel, was the union delegate at Jean-Marie's factory. Jean-Marie later admitted that he suspected the Crow was Roger. When he learned that Gregory had been kidnapped, he went straight to Roger's house to confront him, but changed his mind upon seeing what he thought were police vehicles. In 2017, when the case was reopened and implicated the Jacobs, a testimony from a factory worker resurfaced, describing an altercation between Marcel and Jean-Marie. Marcel apparently disagreed with his nephew's choice to leave the union and, during their argument, said, "I don't shake hands with a boss," the same phrase the Crow frequently used to refer to Jean-Marie. The theory developed during the 2017 reopening, which we believe reflects what truly happened, is that the Jacobs were the masterminds behind Gregory's kidnapping and possibly his murder. They likely orchestrated the kidnapping with Bernard Laroche and possibly Michel Villemain. Bernard would have been responsible for the kidnapping itself. Despite resenting Jean-Marie, they seemingly maintained cordial relations at the time of the murder. The fact that he was with his son Sebastian, who was Gregory's age, might have been a way to lure the little boy into his car. Muriel may have been used by Bernard as an alibi and was likely unaware of what was happening. This would explain why she ultimately confessed to being present during the kidnapping to prove her innocence. To provide a bit more context about her, Muriel was the youngest of 9 children, nearly 15 years younger than Marie-Ange. The introverted teenager was bullied both at school and at home, where she was called Fatty. After her second interrogation by the police and Judge Lambert, it is said that when her father picked her up, she told him the police were her friends and that they had helped her. Another theory assumes that Muriel was involved in the murder because a syringe was found at the location where it is believed the body was discarded. At the time, the teenager was helping to care for her mother's diabetes and was often the one using the syringe. The substance in the syringe could have made Gregory unconscious before his body was thrown into the river. However, the autopsy was unable to determine if Gregory had been drugged before his death, and the syringe has not been proven to be connected to the murder. Bernard, however, might not have known that the Jacobs were planning to kill Gregory. This could explain Marie-Ange's behavior when she attempted to incriminate Jackie to protect her husband from investigation. Everyone knew Jean-Marie had a weapon, and after the kidnapping, Bernard stayed at his Aunt Louisiette's for a week, likely fearing that Jean-Marie or the police would come after him. His last words before he died, when threatened at gunpoint by Jean-Marie, were, "I can explain, but I swear I didn't kill your child." In that case, the Jacobs could be Gregory's murderers. As explained earlier, it is uncertain whether Gregory drowned in the river or was drowned before his body was discarded. They might have agreed on a meeting point with Bernard to take the child and drown him in a location where they wouldn't be seen, later leaving his body in the river. Alternatively, if Muriel's initial testimony to the police and Judge Lambert was true, they may have met Bernard at Docelle, rendered Gregory unconscious, and then thrown his body into the river, allowing him to drown. What also leads us to believe Michel was likely part of the scheme is his close relationship with Bernard, which may explain why the Crow had extensive knowledge about the Villemans. He was also the recipient of the Crow's last call. During the 2017 reopening of the case, his ex-wife Jeanette was implicated in a graphology test. Michel died in 2010, preventing further investigation into his involvement. Most compelling is the fact that Jean-Marie chose to cut all ties with his family. While incarcerated for Bernard's murder, Jean-Marie sent a letter to his parents stating he no longer wanted any connection with them, convinced they knew more than they were letting on. He never spoke to his parents again until their deaths in 2020 and 2023. During his 1993 trial, he urged Muriel and his parents to speak out, but received no answers. Judges in charge of the case also believed that Monique Villemans, Jean-Marie's mother, knew more than she disclosed. She, along with Albert, was indeed interrogated once again in the 2017 reopening of the case. Their primary assumption was that she was protecting her son Michel. However, lacking tangible evidence and with Gregory's grandmother never confessing, they could not turn their speculation into a lead. 40 years later, the Villemans are still desperately waiting for answers. It appears that forensic evidence will not provide any new leads, and they can only rely on testimonies. But just like the silence of their relatives, time has become their enemy, as key figures are passing away. New testimonies from the 2017 reopening added more insight into the already established scenario, but their inconsistencies made them less credible. This case remains haunted by media attention and individuals seeking a moment of fame. In 2024, a fake crow was indeed identified. In the 1980s, a marginalized woman obsessed with the case sent a death threat letter to the Villemans while pretending to be the crow. To this day, Muriel and Marie-Ange Laroche have always maintained their innocence, as well as that of Bernard. Do you agree with our analysis? Did we miss anything? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.